Welcome, everyone. I think we'll probably have some people hopping in a little bit later. And then also, we're going to have a rewatch here. So if you're watching at a later time or date, welcome to you too. If you have a distribution arm of your business with questions around where your margin might be slipping or what to fix first, this video is going to be for you. My name's Stephanie McCauley, and I have a background in operations, finance, and marketing, specifically specializing in working with companies to leverage their technology to build future-proofed, repeatable, scalable business models. And all of that to drive revenue, if we're all being honest here. And so after attending the MODEX event last month, a popular question surfaced in many of our conversations with our clients and also with prospects that we were speaking to. And we thought it appropriate to pull this call together because with everything changing in distribution right now, the question that has surfaced is, where do we actually focus? And more importantly, where is margin leaking that we haven't found? And so for those of you who may have been there at the MODEX event, you saw the push towards automation, things like AI driven fulfillment. The next gen TMS also was a hot topic. And for those of you who weren't there, the headline's kind of this. The industry is signaling a shift towards integrated data-driven operations. It's where it's going. And so my team at Crestwood specifically specializes in full cycle implementations and support with ERP solutions, specifically for businesses in manufacturing and distribution. And what we're seeing at Crestwood is that companies recovering margin the fastest aren't the ones building the newest technology. So you can kind of take a breather. You don't have to keep up with AI right now. They're actually the ones that are fixing what they already have. And so I want to take a few minutes today to talk about this, and I want to try to create this to be informative and also actionable. So we're going to provide you with 4 specific zones where we see margin leaks in distribution operations and what you can actually do about it. And so to do that, I'm joined here today by Shannon from RateLinks. Crestwood and RateLinks work with a lot of the same customers, but we approach it from different angles. So we come in through the ERP on the Crestwood side, and we look at your operational workflow. Shannon and his team at RateLinks come in through the transportation and shipping execution side. And together we work on basically building a full order to ship picture for our clients. So Shannon, thanks for hopping in here. I think you're going to be the more interesting of the two of us today.
I mean, if that's
Yeah.
the case, I hope not. But I I like to think that what I do is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
it's funny when I think back to when I started. When I first got out of college with an electrical engineering degree, I got into this industry. I thought I knew everything until I got into this industry, and then that's when I quickly realized, wow, I got a lot to learn.
Mm.
It's pretty neat being on this side of things, and I really do love talking about freight and how companies can leverage, not only our tools to help them execute, but also the tools to help them collect the right data that they need in order to
Mm.
really impact their bottom line. I think that's the key part is, it's not always about just shipping the product out the door. You got to be as optimal as possible when you're doing it because you've got not only your financial considerations, but you've also got service that you got to think about on the customer side, and you got to balance both of those. It's quite the challenge. So,
Mm.
looking forward to talking with you today about these 4 zones and how we might be able to help some companies figure this out and get it a little more optimal for them.
Yeah, let's share a little bit more about you, Shannon, and maybe what RateLinks, your role at RateLinks, and then also maybe what are you hearing right now from distributors and any initial observations before we get into things here that you might want to set the stage with?
You know, we hear we hear the same stuff. It doesn't really matter what industry they're in. It's always a challenge on the freight side, whether if it's the parcel piece and what's going on, these days with UPS and FedEx, and what's Amazon doing on that side, or on the freight side of things with what's going on with the LTL carriers, FedEx Freight splitting off onto their own, the new density-based freight classes and the impact that's having on companies. And it all comes down to the same thing, and it's cost. And
Mhm.
it's like, how can we better measure this, better monitor this, and be optimal around it? Because it always feels like there's headwinds around freight, no matter who you talk to. So
Mhm.
the complexity is not getting easier. It just is getting more and more complex, is what it seems like. So looking forward to seeing how we can help. And that's where I think systems like the ones that we have, where we can help companies make that freight decision and that parcel decision a lot easier and a lot more automated is where I'm seeing a lot of benefit there, and also capturing the data so they can finally measure and see how they're really doing. One customer told me once, he said, the reason why they liked our system is, he said, at the end of the day, he wants to know if he won or lost.
Hmm.
And he's like, I can't do that if I don't have your system to be able to look at to see, did I win or lose today? And that's where everybody has a different definition of what
Hmm.
it means to win. And that's where we're able to measure that and capture what they really need to help them with that information.
Yeah, I'm seeing similar patterns, and I look at freight as the last mile of a longer problem chain. And that's really what I want us to get into today, because I think that there's a lot of upstream activities that really kind of happen that lead to that last mile. And so, when we think about inventory positioning and cost visibility, I want to start there as our topics in zone 1 of 4 today. The first thing that we see in most operations is kind of this: the system says inventory is available, but available doesn't mean shippable profitability. And so, split shipments, things like rush transfers, fulfillment from the wrong node, all of those show up later as freight costs, but they started as an inventory or cost visibility decision. And so, as we worked alongside an accounting firm recently, I think of this one. We were just with them this week. Matter of fact, one of my team members, Chloe, got back last night from the BDO conference in Vegas. We were working with a CPA firm. They had a $12 million multi-entity client. The system was live, the transactions were flowing, but the financial outputs couldn't be trusted. And so the month end was requiring a lot of manual adjustments on every single cycle. And then the cost of the goods didn't line up with how the business actually operated. And so the CPA firm was spending time explaining the numbers more than trusting them. And obviously that's an issue, right? And so when we went in and we diagnosed it on our side from Crestwood, the root cause wasn't anything that had to do with accounting knowledge. It was really their core system configuration. They had been producing incorrect financial behavior since their go live with their system. So going back to what I said at the start, it's not about new technology. It's really about thinking about your current system. How is it configured, right? And so what we discovered was the posting logic was wrong. The cost and labor flow didn't reflect actual operations. And nobody had caught it because the system was saying everything was fine because that's how it was configured. And so I think this is what matters to distribution leaders that might be listening right now. If you can't trust your cost data, you can't trust your margin data. And if you can't trust your margin data, everything downstream, decision-wise, that you make about freight, fulfillment, and service is built on sand. It's very unsteady. And so, Shannon, I know we talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to know, is this exactly what you're seeing when teams are trying to run a freight program without the trusted data or the right configurations? Any insights you want to share there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is the devil's in the data,
Mhm.
is what it really is. A lot of companies out there, what I see is they're looking at their shipping data and they're using that to accrue. And what they're missing is they could, to me, the shipping data, when I ship that out and I get a freight cost back, that's what I hope to pay. And the invoice, if you're not tying that back to that shipment, you don't know, one, is that really what you paid? And
Mhm.
then if you're lumping everything together into a total charge, you don't understand why your shipment cost that you thought maybe was $100 came back at 120. And it's like, was there an additional charge that was added on? Was it an accessorial of some kind? Was it something that you could fix? Maybe it was a weight that was off. Maybe it was your dimensions that were off
Mm.
when you shipped it out. And that's where we find there's a lot of master data that could be making, very simple change you make to your master data that could now impact that 100 versus $110 difference and make your financials a lot cleaner. Plus, it could also change how you ship it. That those are the little things that we see a lot of times. And if you're not capturing it at that level, oof, I don't
Hmm.
know how you could do this.
Right. Do any customer outcomes come to mind, like once that's been adjusted for them, any like significant lifts that you've seen or that they've experienced?
you know, we had we had one customer where they had redone their rates with the carriers. So they had a certain expectation around, okay, here's how much we should be spending now. And we should be saving, 8%, 10%, whatever the number was. And after a month, they look at it and they're like, hey, our cost is up. It's not down. What's going on? And I thought we were going to be giving a lot more freight to carrier A because they were gave us really good rates, but they're not getting any. What is it? And what it came down to was their shipment characteristics. So their master data around their items and the weights and the dims were wrong. So
Mm,
when it was shipping out with a completely different weight than they were getting invoiced at. So that's what caused the discrepancy in not only cost but also the carrier that was selected. And and that was, you know, something very quick and easy that they could then go fix. And they said, "Oh, now we have the business case that we need internally to go back and fix the master data." And then once they did that, they got right back in line. And because they had our system where they could see all of this stuff, they could easily track the savings that they were supposed to get. They could see exactly where it was wrong and know which items it was, and it happened to be just a subset of their items.
mm.
So it wasn't even everything.
Yeah, it really points back to the small little tweaks you can make, especially when like manual entries are being made and things are being set up in the system that you really don't know where they came from in the first place. And perhaps it was configured incorrectly, but you can go in and make those small little tweaks and it makes the biggest difference ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as we think about those manual entries, it kind of leads me to the second point that I wanted to get to, which is really about order handling and fulfillment workflow. And I see a lot of times with our clients in particular that we're working with that this is where a lot of operations bleed without realizing it. And so, going back to that manual touch, every manual touch is a future freight cost. And it's going to hold, it's for instance, holds that get released late, maybe, or orders that require rework. Rework is my pet peeve. It's one of the most expensive things an organization deals with outside of labor. And then customer service overrides that, change the shipping window are also a big piece to that. So each one of those events changes the rate class, service level, the carrier mix, and it almost never shows up in a workflow problem in any sort of reporting. And so I usually see this showing up as freight creep with our clients. And so what we
Hmm.
see most often is operations that grow faster than their systems happen. And then the team builds workarounds because the workflow doesn't match how the business actually runs. This is so common. And so 6 months
Hmm.
later down the line, those workarounds are now the business process and nobody remembers why, right? And so I think about this, and the fix isn't, to create automation for automation's sake. It's really about making the order workflow match the operational reality, and the decisions happen at the right point now based on that process and the right data. And so, when you look at customer shipping data, can you usually tell where the workflow is breaking upstream?
You can usually see it. And the other place that you see it often is if they are very manual, when you put them into a system like ours and you're capturing the requirements. So, we've got the integration, what data are we pulling in, what data are we sending back? But then we've also got what we call business rules where we can automate a lot of the decision making. So that way they're sure they're going to get the results that they want and the outcomes that they want. And usually when we get into that phase and we hear a lot of what seem like very obscure requirements.
Mhm.
And that's where it's like, hey, are you guys doing a lot of stuff manually by chance? And they're like, well, yeah. And it's like, okay, we're going to take a lot of subjectivity out of this. And, it's a computer. Computer understands ones and zeros, very objective. We got one thing to do. And that's where the data, then, if you are looking at it before and after, what you're going to notice is probably a lot cleaner in terms of you're not going to see an LTL shipment go to a customer on the same day as a parcel shipment.
Mm.
Sometimes you see that where all of a sudden they're like, oh, quick, in the afternoon, I got to send this one box. I already did the LTL shipment that morning. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm going to now do this additional order that just came in and send that out parcel. It's like that could have ridden for free, on the LTL shipment, essentially. So
Mm.
that's where you kind of see that change a little further downstream because most of these companies really don't have a lot of data around it. They have a lot of feelings. That's what
Mhm.
I see. And that's usually how I encounter this stuff and realize that maybe there's a little process issue that we got to work through with them. And that's what the system helps kind of, you know, squeeze out in
Mm.
for them.
It's beautiful. Yeah, the patterns in the shipping data really tell you exactly where the workflow is breaking. Do you have any examples? Like, for instance, if somebody's thinking about this specific area, is it any triggers that you're looking for, like late releases or split shipments or maybe expedite frequency? Is there anything like that that you kind of say, hey, alert, alert, these are things to look for if you're assessing this area?
Usually what I see um, is going to be around when people come to me and they say that, uh, here's the one person that knows. And it's like, and then when
Yes.
that person's gone on vacation, we struggle.
Hmm.
And then what you find out from there is that one person knows how to handle all of these discrepancies that are popping up. Or they just, again, like you said, they made a decision once upon a time, a long time ago, for probably one scenario. And that just became the rule going forward, even though that maybe that scenario just doesn't really happen anymore. But they just keep doing it because nobody really questioned it anymore and it's so manual how they're doing things. So that's usually
Right.
what I see.
That's fair. I usually think about those roles, when you're building an organization for scale, it's got to be scalable, repeatable. So if you take out one role and you replace it with a new person, can that function or can those workflows still continue without what I call the hero who comes in and saves the day because they're the only person that knows it?
Right.
And a lot of times organizations can kind of be held hostage from that type of employee because if they start to underperform and they're the only person who knows it, you're dealing with that, right? And so the idea is to create scalable, repeatable systems and workflows that allow you to plug and play people. And I like to look at it in a more optimistic way where I like to promote people out of a role, and I can only promote you if, that is built into a systematic process. So that's something to think about as well. So, as we think about where shipment planning becomes really critical, that kind of takes us into this next piece, which is, where distribution leaders are thinking about shipping planning and carrier execution. And so I think what happens here is you might be thinking whether it's okay, so distribution leaders, they think the real action specifically is in shipment planning and execution. And I don't think they're wrong in that. But what I do think they want to consider is whether the information being made is being made with the right information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, we have sort of a second client story, and this was a great one because it's really in your territory. We have a pet supply distributor running on Acumatica specifically. They're the mix of the B2B wholesale to pet retailers and direct to consumer. And what we saw was their volume was growing really fast and their revenue was growing, but their margin wasn't keeping up. And their ops team was convinced that it was a carrier contract issue, but their finance team was thinking it was something totally deeper, but couldn't prove it, right? And so they brought us in with you guys and they said, hey, go figure it out. So I thought this would be a great example of shipping planning and execution that you could share as a story and maybe some best practices, Shannon.
Yeah, and this is a common one that we run into where um, companies want to come up with new strategies around the freight. So in this instance, they had really two issues that I would probably categorize it as. The first issue was because of their some of their customers requiring, ASNs from them, they had to, their challenge was they had an item that went into two boxes. And it's like, so you think of that on the ordering side, so you have a sales order, you order a quantity of one that goes out, but that's being put into two boxes because of the size of the item. It wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
kit, it was just a big item, I guess. And that would cause issues when the ASN was created because it would send two, because there were two boxes created. And that was just from how their shipping was working, where they would enter in the packages on the shipment. And what they really needed was one package with one tracking number, just one of them. That's all they needed. So it would generate the ASN correctly and say that you ordered one, you got one, and here's the tracking number. So they were having issues on that side that was costing them, um, money from their customer. And then the second side that they had was they were trying to deploy some different carriers that would have saved them about, I think it was 10% on their freight side, and
Mhm.
they just couldn't deploy them because the system they had didn't support it. And you couldn't do it manually because of their volume. So that's where we came in and we solved both of those because, integrating to carriers, I mean, that's nothing new for us at all. So we dropped that in. It was a carrier we already supported anyways. So then they were able to deploy that carrier with that rates to start handling their LTL freight a lot better based on their strategy. And then we also were able to fix the integration. And then what that led me down the path to now is they're also looking at the whole order to cash cycle that they
Mhm.
have, and they're trying to measure, their whole freight spend. Instead of looking at it as one big lump sum of cost, they're breaking it down into the different components. How much of it is fuel, how much of it is residential charge, how much of it is lift gate, inside delivery, whatever other charges they have. So that way they can get a little more strategic, again, around negotiating those rates, making sure they have the right carriers in place to handle all that freight. And then also tying it back to the exact customer, the exact sales order.
Mhm.
Uh, that's going to allow them down the line to start looking at profitability by customer. And it's like, and they haven't said that to me yet, but I'm sure that's the direction that they're heading in, is to do that because they almost always do when I get into these types of scenarios with these types of customers.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the carrier integration, and I want to dive in just a little bit deeper there because I feel like that is really rich information to know how the integration works and how maybe that can be streamlined just for maybe those who don't have that set up. Would you be able to speak to approach there on how to think about integration?
Well, when it comes to, I guess that's one of the misnomers that I run into a lot is with a lot of companies, they think that because it's a different carrier or a different mode, that things have to be done differently in the system. And that's where our system, what it allows you to do is it doesn't matter what carrier, what mode, it's essentially the same process. And because of the integration that we have, we're grabbing all the information that's needed to generate that shipment. So to the user, they don't notice much of a difference. So from the training side, usability side, you want to talk about scale. I mean, we've got customers that, have summer, high school help that comes in and does the shipping, and it takes 20 minutes and they're up to speed and they know how to use the system for whatever type of shipment is out there because the system's going to drive what's needed and keep the guardrails up so that way they can't put in wrong information or do it the wrong way. And I think that's the key thing. And that's why carriers just, you know, on the other end of all this, we're giving them exactly what they need so they can do their job and printing out all the right documents that are required. That's, again, that's the whole point of our system is
Right.
to automate that whole process and make it be, I think one customer says ubiquitous. It doesn't matter which carrier you're using, what mode you're using, put it all in the system, let it automate it and handle all of the complexities. Don't put the decision making in the person at the shipping station's hand. They don't have enough intel to know what to do all the time. Then you're just
Right.
rolling this thing back to being manual.
Right, right. And then 6 months down the road, you're a little bit frustrated, right?
Yeah. Well, you're definitely not only frustrated, but probably paying a lot more than you thought.
True. The integration topic's interesting to me because that's, of course, how we work together is through our integration between the Acumatica system and then, of course, rate links. Any insights you want to provide, really, like if you're thinking about a new ERP or if you're on an existing ERP, any challenging thoughts to like look at your ERP and consider those integrations?
You know, because of how we approach everything, the way that we work is we're called we're connected, we're not embedded.
Mhm.
And that there's a reason why we do it that way. We stay connected to every ERP. We do a lot of real-time integration. So what that means is the user's in front of our screen, they put in their sales order number, shipment ID, delivery number, whatever that magic field is for their ERP. And at that point, then our system grabs, does the real-time integration, reaches out to the ERP, grabs the info that we need in order to generate the shipment. They ship it, prints out the labels, bill lading, and then it communicates back in real time, sends back the usual, tracking number, charges, carrier. And we stay connected. That way, it doesn't matter what ERP you're on. Because we've had a lot of customers start with one ERP and then as they grow, they may move into a different one. And it doesn't matter with us. It's the same shipping system. And to their shipping folks, it doesn't change.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter what's on the back end side of it. Just like on the carrier side, doesn't matter what carrier it is. UPS or FedEx are going to get the label. It's going to print out. It's going to say one or the other on it. Whether it's LTL, you're going to get a bill lading. It's going to have the carrier name on it. It doesn't matter. And that's why I think from an ERP perspective, what's important to look at is, I think, to make sure that it mainly fits you from the rest of the side of the business, operationally. Does it have what you need for your inventory, your financials that you're trying to do? That I think is the most important thing. That's where I see companies
Mhm.
kind of outgrow their ERPs is from that perspective, but not from a
Completely
shipping.
agree. I completely agree. We work with a lot of legacy clients that are on like a QuickBooks, an old version of a QuickBooks, or an old version of Dynamics GP, or maybe you're on SAP, or maybe you're on a current version of like a NetSuite or something, and you want to make a shift because
Yeah.
you're finding yourself doing a lot of work outside the system, and you want something more consolidated into one place that can connect with the systems that you want to be connected with to, streamline that entire workflow. And so as I think about how the future is shifting with AI and how things are shifting with automation, it really goes back to you don't have to get too complex. If you're operating
Mhm.
on Excel right now, Excel is a lousy system of data or a database, and so you don't want to use Excel as your database, but you do want to have that core function of your ERP, have the integrations and the connections with the solutions like Array Links, and that's really going to help you gain some efficiencies just right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, Excel, it's funny, still run into it a lot these
Yeah.
days, and it's great until you get to, well, it's great until it's not great, is really the way to think of it. And once you get to a certain size, it's just not manageable.
Mm-mm.
And that's where now with all the new technology that's out there because of AI and the co-pilots and how you can take advantage of that with your data, it is important to think about that also from your ERP perspective. Because that's where, we've got a lot of great shipping and transportation data, and that's where we can capture your shipment, we can track it, so we can have all your service information, and we can capture that freight invoice and match it all up so you can see what your true cost is on that freight side. And then we capture the right key field information that's needed so that way it can be connected back to the ERP because it's like
Right.
I don't need your entire master item list and your cost. I just need to know it was this order that had this item number on it. So I need two fields and maybe a customer ID. And then you can connect to the rest of your enterprise data in the ERP through a Power BI or something like that to then understand true cost. And I think that's the real way to go. And that's when the AI really kicks in and can help give you some insights into what you can do that's different.
That's such a great point. Right now, I just came back from a conference last week that was very AI focused, and the biggest, if you're thinking about AI and how it can best help your business, the best thing I can say is layer number one is security and governance. Let's make sure that you've got your security layers in place. You know where your data is, how it's structured. You've got guidelines and rules for the future. Then you can stack on top of that all this cool AI stuff, AI agents and additional automation. But until you really have kind of that basic layer and you've got your data foundation in place, you're just dealing with dirty data, and that's going to significantly affect your margin. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things when you talk about data quality, one of the main components of data quality is, does it accurately describe what happened? And that's something that you have to really think about for a second when you're looking
Hmm.
at your transportation data as an example. If you just have a total charge, does it accurately describe what happens? Like, absolutely not. You're missing how much of that is fuel, how much of that was an accessorial, how much of that was dimensional weight versus actual weight. You have to have those details because then as you're asking your AI agent these types of questions, or it's looking for anomalies, it's going to find the right anomalies and it's not going to
Hmm.
send you down the wrong path. And that's where there can be a lot of red herrings out there if you're not careful about that data quality side.
That's such a good point too. As you think about the pet client, the pet distribution client that we have, what would you say were some of the biggest outcomes once we got them set up and structured? What were the biggest takeaways that you saw with them?
I think the one major takeaway that I always see from a lot of companies, and they saw this too, I think, is just um, less work to do the same work. It took the less amount of time. It was a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot more predictable what was
Hmm.
about to happen. And it allowed them to have a lot more confidence now in the data that was happening. So rather than chasing these, what I would call maybe tactical issues,
Hmm.
now they're spending their time on the strategic issues. And that's where we talk about, they're shifting their freight from a tactical necessity into more of a strategic asset, which is exactly what they should be doing. And that's because they don't have to spend any more time, going in and fixing these ASNs that had, two packages that shouldn't have two packages. They don't have to chase down this LTL carrier and do all this manual stuff with them anymore if they want to take advantage of them. They don't have these different processes in the warehouse and they have to worry about training and all that stuff. It's all gone. Now they can
Yeah.
focus on their real job.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, as we consider these three zones we've talked about so far, a lot of them are more sort of proactive thinking, while I see that they can be reactive at this point if you're already dealing with these things and you've got to get in and make some adjustments. But really, these are sort of strategic thought processes on how you can approach just finding out where that margin is leaking, right? And
Hmm.
so then I start to think about, but what about the stuff that you need to protect? So you have like the service recovery and margin protection. I want to talk about that. And I think there are hidden costs of service recovery, things like expedite fees, reships, claims. I want us to talk a little bit about that. I want us to talk about why it shows up as a freight cost, even though it started as a visibility problem, because I think this is where people can start to get very strategic and kind of get on the defense in a way, if that makes sense. Would you speak to those?
Yeah, and I think from a expedite fee perspective, it's important to understand why this is happening. Is this because of an inventory outage? Is this caused by maybe it was a damage claim? Maybe you did have the inventory on time at the right time, you shipped it out, but it got damaged. Did it get damaged because of the carrier you're using, or did it get damaged because of how you're packaging it? Again, there's so much at play here, and it's not always the carrier side. You can. We had a customer who shipped out shower doors. Get your head wrapped around that one for a second. So
Wow.
imagine a glass shower door. They
Mhm.
shipped them out, and the packaging that it was in was pretty fascinating. And so they made a carrier change where they went with, I'm not going to name the carrier, they went with the other parcel carrier. They were on one and went to the other because they were getting a better rate. And I think after 2 weeks, it just It didn't work. It was too many damage claims. And because of that, they were doing a lot of expedited freight because they still had to get the orders there on time. And it's like, so were they expediting because of an inventory outage? No. And because they had that visibility, they knew what the real problem was. If they didn't have the visibility, they would have just thought that maybe it was an inventory problem and they would have gone to the manufacturing side and spent a lot of time to find out it wasn't a manufacturing issue. So that's probably the best example I could think of where you could have done the wrong thing, spent a lot of time to figure out that no, it's just you made a carrier switch and that carrier just was not equipped to handle your product, even though it was packaged well. Because the other carrier, once you switch back, they handled it very well. And yeah, they were a little more expensive, but in the total grand scheme of things, it wasn't more expensive.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great example of just one little area that you could focus in on and make some changes and just slightly tweak. And you're right, a lot of times, is it the packaging itself? Is it how you packaged it? Is it the carrier? We've all seen those like airline videos where they're tossing the luggage out of the
Yeah.
plane and they're just tossing it onto the ground. I mean, that's a great example, right?
Unfortunately, it's a lot truer than you think. I remember when I was in college and I worked at Land's End and I had to pack a UPS truck one night. Yeah, it's it's again, that was a long time ago. But yeah,
Yeah.
how we packed that, I could see how you could definitely do some damage yourself if you're not careful.
So true. We've all moved houses too, and the way we pack our boxes varies on how things are going to arrive at the new house when you move, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, so we've kind of talked about these four areas: inventory and cost visibility as the first one. We talked about the order handling, fulfillment
Mhm.
workflow. We talked about shipping, planning, and execution, and then of course this piece of service recovery. And I think the thing here that most leaders miss is that three of those four zones happen before the carrier even touches the shipment. And so, based on that, what's the one thing you want these leaders, if you're a leader, maybe you're just in distribution in general, different roles, what do you think they need to take away from the stories that we've walked through today?
The one thing that I've learned is that having your real cost, so that to me is the invoice data, and we capture that through the freight audit side of us. Having that, I think, is the foundation that you build on because that's going to give you all the details and all the visibility that you need. So that's what you're going to use to drive your strategies, create your strategies, know where you need to create strategies, know where your leakage is. It's all there. And then the rest of the system is meant for control. And that's how you execute on it. So, we talk about the three Ds, diagnose, develop, deploy. You know, leverage the data so you diagnose the problem. That way you develop the right strategy that when deployed will actually work. We see a lot of companies actually do it in the reverse, probably, where they deploy and then they develop their strategy and then they diagnose why it didn't work, is what I find. Because everybody thinks if I put in a system, it fixes it, right?
Hmm.
If I put in an ERP, it's just going to solve all of my problems. And it's like, well, not if you haven't diagnosed if you haven't diagnosed your problem, what problem are you trying to solve? That way, when you develop your solution, and it gets deployed, it actually works. So that's why I always start on the audit side. I mean, shipping is great, it's control, it helps, but until you have the real cost data, you don't really know what you're really paying. You know what you're hoping to pay, but this tells you what you're really paying.
It's so true. I'm a big fan, if you're watching this and you're considering a new ERP, I'm a big fan of doing an assessment by somebody who's experienced in your industry because it's one thing to go to a provider and have them just show you the software and how it works. It's a whole nother thing to work with somebody who's an expert in that specific industry and can tell you based on like the stories we've shared today, key insights we have from clients we've worked with to say, hey, when you go to consider this solution, let's talk about these key workflows that you're doing as an organization. There's important insights within each of those. We're going to ask some questions around. We're not just going to ask you, do you need to, do order to cash workflow process. Here's how it works in our system. What we want to know is how your business works. And then we want to make sure that the system can actually support that. But then we're also going to bring in insights from other clients that we've implemented and share some of those best practices. And so some of the things I've noticed as we, talk with people considering a new ERP and how it connects to different systems, we know that you don't know what you don't know, and that's really what like our team is for at Crestwood, and the team like RateLinks is there for is to help guide you through those. And so, as you said it, Shannon, I think the assessment's a really great example. Something we do is a business optimization assessment, and really it's a structured working session with our team.
Hmm.
It's a complimentary session. What we do is we get you and your decision makers on a call, and we map out your order to ship process against those kind of 4 zones. We're going to ask you about your holistic company, the core processes that are running the company, and we're going to identify where the friction lives before we ever tell you how technology is going to support it. And so I think
Hmm.
what this does, to your point, is it gives you a really good game plan to understand the system changes you need to make to help run your operations more efficiently. And I just noticed that Chloe behind the scenes, she threw that link into the chat. If you're interested in that business optimization, if you're watching this, please, let's get that scheduled with our team. But we're not going to just show you a new system you need. We want to talk through what's the system you're currently using? Could it be optimized? And if not, then let's talk about that new system and how it integrates or how it connects with a solution like, for instance, with you, Shannon, with RateLinks.
Hmm.
I think you walk away knowing which zone to address first after something like that, what the fix looks like, and what the expected margin recovery is going to look like as well, because those things become, like you said earlier, predictable, right?
Hmm.
And you then get to decide what you want to do next to future proof the company and to create something that is scalable and repeatable. And so, we built that specifically with distribution leaders in mind, because you can invest into the wrong fix and you can spend a lot of time
Yeah.
spinning wheels and focusing on the wrong things. I like that quote: the enemy of the great is oftentimes the good. You can be doing a lot of good stuff, but what if you could be doing the greatest stuff because you're focusing on the things that really make the creator of an impact, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that's one thing is, let's get you in for a business optimization assessment if you're watching this. And I want to find those friction points for you because they're really common and it's something we see all the time, but it is possible for multiple integrations and connections to exist and for us to work together and make sure that the company overall is taken care of. And so, as we kind of wrap up here the last, 15 minutes or so, we had some questions that were sent in on social media. We had some that our clients have sent in. And I thought it would be good for us to go through these really quick and maybe answer some of these typical Q&As. And if you're watching this and you've got questions too, please, throw those into the chat and we're happy to answer anything. It can be as detailed as you would like. But one of the questions that came through was, how do we know if it's an ERP problem or a process problem? And the short answer here is it's usually both. And that's why we do the assessment before making any sort of recommendation, because we really need to understand where
Hmm.
you're currently operating, how you're doing it, where the systems are connected. And this is the big mistake most people make. The ERP and for
Hmm.
in this instance, RateLinks, it's not the process. You have a business process and it's supported by the technology.
Yep.
And a lot of times companies will think that the actual technology is the business process. And so, Shannon, any insights you want to share there just based on experience?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, especially on the shipping side of things, a lot of that is based on the physical process of their warehouse. And it's like, so it's so important to understand that so that way you put the system in a way that complements that process. And, at that point, the only time you would change that process is if there's something inefficient about it. And it's more the physical side of it, not the system side of it. So
Right.
I think you're absolutely right. The technology is there to support it.
Yeah, yeah. The second one that we have, the second question we have in here is, what's the fastest zone to fix for the quickest margin recovery? Because that's what we're here for after all. So what if you could do one thing today, Shannon, to go pull some margin back, what would it be?
Well, I would immediately turn on the freight audit,
Okay.
because that's going to find immediately probably 3 to 5%. And then it's also going to set you up for the more strategic play, which could open up anywhere from a 10 to 30% opportunity for you.
Huge. I think those numbers are really impactful, definitely noteworthy. Yeah, that's huge. Tell me more about the freight audit.
Well, it's fantastic. It works great. Um, I mean, really, the freight audit side right now today, it's already happening today with every company. They're getting the invoice, and the question is, they're probably doing more of a reconciliation. They look at it and they go, "Yeah, that's ours." They might match it up to some order or some shipment that went out the door. What we're going to do is a little more in depth. It's going to match it uh, line by line, cost, charge by charge, make sure that everything's matching up. And if anything's wrong, it's going to flag it immediately. Nice thing is it's very automated. So you only deal with exceptions. And that's where we actually have a lot of AI and machine learning in that part of our system. And it's to flag everything and tell you what's actually wrong on the invoice. You don't have to try to figure out, it's not like it's looking at the invoice and it comes in at $110 and it should be 100 and you got to figure out why is it off by $10. It tells you everything. And then it's just up to you to decide what you want to do with it. And we do have the service on our side where we can handle that. It just depends on the customer size and if it makes sense to outsource that to us or not.
That makes sense. I love to hear about what you're doing with AI behind the scenes because our philosophy at Crestwood is AI where it matters, when it matters. And right now with the noisy market of you need to use AI for everything and basically automate your life out of your work, doesn't make sense, right? You need to use it when it matters, where it matters. And so
Yeah.
I like that you guys have applied that as well, it sounds like.
Well, and it's all, on the freight audit side, it's a perfect spot because when that invoice comes in, here's the I guess here's the funny part that I see with a lot of companies is they'll put a rate tolerance in place where they're like, it's within $10, that's close enough because it costs them more than $10 to figure out the problem.
Mm,
You just do simple math. It's like until you've audited an invoice, you really can't appreciate how painful it can be. Invoice comes in, it doesn't, first you got to find what was this supposed to be? How long is that going to take? 20 minutes, 15 minutes?
mhm.
And then it doesn't match, and then you got to figure out why it's wrong. So, I mean, you could burn an hour pretty quickly on an invoice, depending on how obscure the invoice is.
It's
Uh,
so true.
and it's like, so at an hour, yeah, if it's off by $10, you just spent more time, more money, salary wise on that than it's worth. So that's why a lot of these companies will get a 3 to 5% savings. That's what we're catching is that little $10, $5 difference. And there's a lot that occurs.
Wow.
That's what the computer does. Computer's going to catch that and tell you exactly what it is, just like that in an instant. So that way you don't waste any time. And then imagine you go through all that work and you find out that the rate is perfect. You just
Hmm.
wasted all that time. You don't
Yeah.
touch any of those with our system. So that's why you're able to really harvest a lot of savings out of here with minimal effort.
Yeah, I love that. I like finding these really quick wins in small ways that make a huge impact, right?
Mhm.
So the other question that we have here is if we just went through a WMS or a TMS implementation, why are we still leaking margin? And I'm going to go back to what I said at the start of the call. And the implementation likely fixed the tool of your ERP, but not the upstream workflow or the ERP configuration. And so if that's something you're dealing with and you've got questions around it, let's definitely connect and troubleshoot that. That's exactly what we did in that first
Mhm.
story that I shared about the CPA firm. Is there anything, Shannon, you would add to that?
I would say you're probably leaking because you're not able to measure everything. Because it's like somehow you're coming down and you're looking at a number and you're like, it's still going up, but it's because you probably don't have the right data. It's probably not being fed to you in a real time enough nature at the detail that you need to finally plug the hole. One of the reports that we have that we will turn on the freight audit side, it's called a lost savings report. And what that is the invoice comes in and it gets re-rated again based on your shipping rules to determine did you follow your rule? Because you put your rules in place based on how you want to financially execute on your freight, and did you follow your rule or not? And if not, it's going to show you what you should have done and what that would have cost. And then the delta between what it should have cost and what it cost is how much savings you just lost. So you can get to it at a invoice by invoice, shipment by shipment level. So you could see, is it a location? Is it a carrier? Is it a customer? Is it an item? What is it that's making this happen? And then stop it.
Yeah, yeah, so insightful. I've enjoyed this conversation because I joke around about being a business junkie. Like, I really like to find better ways and more efficient ways of creating business processes that scale. And part of it I joked around earlier was about revenue, but the truth is we're all working for a paycheck, and it's paying our mortgage. And I would much rather enjoy the work I'm doing and have a system that works for me and I'm not frustrated with each day. I
Yeah.
have this vision where everybody has a beautiful dashboard when they log in for the day. The dashboard has your lagging KPIs, which are the results of how business is going. And then it's got the leading KPIs below it that show you all the different levers that are pushing those numbers to be true. And it's in those levers that you really
Mhm.
start to turn and pull things and make a difference for how the business is performing. And it's these little things like a connector, between our systems. It's little things like going back and looking at your configuration that make the biggest difference. But I also recognize that sometimes you're just on the wrong system and you're going to need a new one. And
Mhm.
being strategic with that, knowing what you want that outcome to look like and working towards that, I think becomes, your competitive edge, especially in the era of AI. AI is not
Yeah.
going to take all of this away. And so there's too many fine details in here, and AI is horrible at math right now. So don't allow any AI tool to calculate your margin or any sort of freight costs or anything along those lines. Make sure that you're being really smart there.
Mhm.
So Shannon, before we hop off here, any final words from your side of things?
I would say, final word I would say is data. Data is your friend. If you don't have the data, that's probably where you should start to solve the problem.
Completely agree. Data is power. Um, I think that's the core foundation here. So hopefully everybody benefits from this information. We will repost this video after it's complete, and you'll see it on places like YouTube and LinkedIn. So any of the links we mentioned during the call, those will be in the comments or in the section of each of those videos. And so feel free to reach out to any of us, Shannon, myself, if you want to have more conversations or if there's additional questions that we can answer. We're here to support and help make businesses process better. So Shannon, thanks so
Yep.
much for hopping in here today, and I look forward to more conversations and more work together.
Yep. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You got it. Have a good one, guys. See ya.